In this video, I want to introduce you to another concept in local adjustments or masking, and that's radial gradients. So what it does is allow us to take a part of the image and really emphasize what we want to say and how we want to say it. So take a look at this before and after, and look at the difference that this makes here. This is the power that we have when we use radial gradients. What we're doing is taking the light and concentrating it and pointing the viewer's eye exactly where we want them to see. It really is a dramatic difference because we're making the light itself more dramatic. So let's dive in, let's get started, and let me show you exactly how this all works. So if we want to create a photo that has a maximum impact, the cropping tool is going to get us most of the way there, filling the frame with our subject. And that's exactly what I want to show you now. So we're going to click on crop on the bottom left here, and that's going to bring up a box that I can use to crop an image. But here's the thing, I actually want to change the orientation. I want this to be a landscape orientation. All I need to do is click on that little icon on the top left there, and that's going to switch us from portrait or a vertical orientation to a landscape or a horizontal one. Now I can just drag on the screen and reposition this the way I want. I don't want to cut off the top of the building, so something right around here, I think that's going to work really well. I'll click that checkbox, and now we have our cropped image. We have a more effective photo already. So the next step, we're going to talk about our global adjustments. I really want to provide a foundation for this photo before we go ahead and apply these radial gradients to it. I'm going to click on light on the bottom. I'm going to grab my exposure slider here and drag that to the left, somewhere to around maybe -1, right? It was just a little bit too bright for my taste. The next adjustment we want to make is to the highlights. We really want to recover the highlight detail even more. So I'm going to grab my highlight slider and go all the way here, let's say 85. So the next step is to recover the shadow detail. All we need to do is click on that shadow slider and drag that to the right. Let's do that, 70. Perfect. Now look at the shadow detail that we were able to bring out, and look at the highlight detail we were able to bring out. This is what I mean by normalizing the photo. We're already building a better foundation. Now next up is our white slider. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that white slider to the right about here. Now it just gives more life to the photo, right? If we recover the highlights and recover the shadows, sometimes it just looks a little dull because we lose a little contrast in the process. This just brightens the whole image back up again. So our next adjustment we're going to make is to our blacks. So I'm going to take that black slider and I'm going to drag it to the left and just increasing a little bit of contrast just in the very darkest part of the image. Maybe something around here. Perfect. Now let's take a look at the before and the after of just these global adjustments. I'm going to tap and hold on the screen, before and after. So this is already looking so much better. There's a few more adjustments we need to make before we head into our radial gradient. So let's open up the effects tab. I'm going to grab my texture slider, and I'm going to drag this just to add just a little bit more detail to the photo, something around 20. Next up, clarity. I'm going to reduce the clarity to, let's say, -10. It just softens up sometimes the harshness of our photo. We're going for a very moody, ethereal kind of look. Now to offset that a little bit, I'm going to add just a little bit of dehaze here. I'm going to grab my dehaze slider and move it to the right just a little bit, giving me a little bit more contrast and also just a little bit more color in the photo as well. Now, speaking of colors, I actually do want to add just a little bit more color and punch to the photo. So let's open up our color tab here. I'm going to find my vibrant slider, and I'm going to drag this to the right. So let's go to about 15 or so. It just gives me a little bit more color, even more so than what the dehaze gave us. Now from here, I know I want the photo to be not just more colorful, but also warmer, right? This is a sunset photo. So now I'm going to scroll up and click on where it says grading. And what I want to do is click on that third wheel. That's going to identify with my highlights, drag up just a little bit, and where it says hue, I want to drag that to the right until I see 40. And I know exactly what number I'm going to apply because typically I apply this very same number to all of the photos I want to add a little bit warmth to either a sunrise or a sunset. Next, I'm going to grab that saturation. I'm going to drag that to the right. Let's do 65. So I'm going to click on done. Now the next thing we need to do is concentrate the viewer's eye towards the middle of the frame. So I never forget to add a little bit of a vignette. So I'm going to click on the word effects. I'm going to find my vignette slider and I'm just going to drag that just a little bit, maybe just -10. That's all we need, -10, -15, maybe -20 in some circumstances. You shouldn't notice this impact until it's removed, but I can guarantee you this is going to make a big difference. So that finalizes our global adjustments. There's our before and there's our after. It's already a dramatic difference. But here's where we take things a step further. So let's dive into our masking and make some local adjustments. So next up, I'm gonna click on masking on the bottom left there. Then I'm gonna click on that blue icon with the plus. And I wanna bring up my linear gradient, and here's why. I typically do this anytime I have something in the foreground that I don't want to draw the person's eye away from the middle of the photo. So I'm gonna click and drag from the bottom up, effectively creating a gradient in the foreground. Now what I want to do is click on where it says light on the bottom and just drag my exposure down. Let's go to a full stop here. Let's make this -1. I'm going to click that checkbox. Look at what that does. It just gives this really important, almost cinematic feel to it, but it's very effective as well. All right, next up, I'm going to click the masking icon again. I'm going to click that plus icon again, and we're going to create a radial gradient. So I'm going to click on radial gradient here. And here's what we want to do. We have a really interesting subject matter here. We have this beautiful setting sun in the bottom left-hand corner of the image, and this is where the magic happens. This is where the image starts to come alive. We want to emphasize that. We want to add more light to it. So with that radial gradient selected, we want to tap where we want to apply that effect, and we're going to drag outward. I can move my finger around the screen and we can create any size we want. Now I'm going to do a smaller one first because we're actually going to apply this several times, but that first one I want to be quite small, and when I'm happy with that size, I'm gonna let go. Now let me point your attention to that white vertical line on the left-hand side here, right next to that panel with all these icons. We're gonna drag that off to the right so we can really take a look at what's happening. Now that first option here we're gonna see is feather. So I can drag that to the right, or I can drag that to the left. Now if I drag it to the left, you're really gonna see what it's doing. It gives me a really hard line. It's a very, very narrow transition. Most of the time, honestly, I would never use it this way. I do typically drag the feather all the way to the right. And what that does is give us a nice, even and soft transition. So we never really see where the effect is applied and where it stops. So now that we have our feather applied, I'm just gonna drag that slider back to the left. Now, with this selection in place, we're gonna click on the word light here. I'm gonna take my exposure, and I'm gonna make this brighter. I'm gonna go all the way up here to, let's do around 70. Now I could go further, but I'm not going to go further yet because I want to build this. I actually want to apply more than one radial gradient so I can create a very realistic sun effect. Now the exposure alone doesn't really give us the feeling of the sun. We really do need to make a few more adjustments here that's going to simulate what it would really look like if that sun was flaring into this image. So what we're going to do next is we're going to click on color, and I want to add a little bit of warmth, right? Because if the sun really was in that very specific spot, it would be a little bit warmer. So I'm going to grab my temperature slider here. I'm going to drag it to the right. I'm just going to do about 15. It just gives us a little bit more warmth and looks a little bit more realistic in the process. Now the next thing I would do is also adjust the color temperature in terms of tint. And typically that means I'm going to grab that tint slider and move it just a little bit. I think 7's good there. Perfect. Now the last thing we need to do, and this is something that honestly doesn't occur to most people, if we were shooting into the sun, we really would lose a little bit of contrast, wouldn't we? There's a specific effect. Everything looks a little bit hazy. So the next thing we're gonna do is click on the word effects here. I'm gonna grab my dehaze slider and I'm gonna drag this to the left. Typically around 10 or 20 will do it. For now, we're just gonna say -10. Those three sliders specifically is a secret sauce to creating a realistic sun flare or glow from the sun. We're gonna do this again on a larger area. And what that does is allow us to build this to really sell this effect. So I'm gonna click this checkbox. I'm gonna click on the masking again. I'm gonna click the plus icon. I'm gonna choose radial gradient. I'm gonna drag again, slightly larger here. So now that we have our next selection in place, let's apply a very similar adjustment to this and just build on it from here. So the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna click on light and I'm gonna add more exposure. So I'm gonna drag this to the right. I think around +30 is really gonna do this. This is already looking really good. Next thing we need to do is add a little bit of warmth, just like we did last time. So I'm gonna click on color, go to my temperature slider and drag this to the right. Around 20 or so is gonna do it. I'm also gonna add just a little bit of tint here. So I'm gonna click on that tint slider, drag that to the right just a little bit too. I think 5 is gonna work perfectly here. Now the last thing we need to do is add some dehaze. So I'm gonna click on effects. I'm gonna take my dehaze slider and I'm gonna drag it to the left just a little bit, just like we did last time. -10 is gonna do it here. And I wanna do one more thing too, because this really is something you should know about, is I will oftentimes take my clarity slider and reduce that as well. So let's do that here. I'm gonna reduce it just a little bit, just -5 or -10. If you have a flare of the sun, it would naturally lose contrast and have a softening effect. All right, so take a look at this photo now. Look at the before and look at the after. Honestly, I think most people would stop there. That's already such an improvement in the photo. But again, we really want to make this as impactful as possible. And this is a good opportunity for me to show you one last little thing we can do that's really gonna make this a whole lot better. So let me show you what this is. We're gonna create another radial gradient. I'm gonna click on that masking icon here on the bottom left. I'm gonna click on that plus icon on the right-hand side. I'm gonna go ahead and click on radial gradient. And now I'm going to drag a nice big gradient across most of the image. Let's say about 2/3 of the image here. And I'm gonna click on that feather icon on the left-hand side. And now I am gonna drag this down just a little bit. Right around there is gonna work, right? We just wanna back it off slightly. And with that, we're actually going to invert this mask. So I'm going to click that next icon right below that feather. That's gonna invert the mask. So now I'm affecting everything that's outside of that sun ray. If we want to really sell this effect, instead of just putting light in areas where the sun's gonna be, we're gonna invert that and remove a little light in areas where the sun is not going to be. So having said that, I'm gonna go ahead and click on that word light. And instead of increasing the light like we did previously, I'm just gonna grab my exposure slider and decrease the light. Let's do about -0.4 here, right? Just a little bit. Now, if we wanna just make this a little bit better, if we really wanna make this more realistic, what I typically would do is grab our highlights, bring that down just a little bit. I'm also gonna reduce the color temperature. And that's really important. If we added warmth to the sun and we know the eye is gonna go to whatever's brightest and whatever's warmest, well, wouldn't it make sense to add a little bit of coolness where we don't want people to look? That's exactly what we're gonna do now. So I'm gonna click on color, I'm gonna find my temperature slider here, and I'm gonna move that down right about there. Next, just like we did previously, I'm gonna grab my tint slider and add just a little bit of a tint to that. I love that almost magenta feel that happens, especially when we cool things down. It just offsets some of that color. I think that looks great. Now the last thing I want to do, and something that really isn't obvious, is I'm going to grab my dehaze slider, and that's going to be in the effects tab here. And watch what happens if I move it to the right. You see what's happening here? We're adding way too much color to the photo. Even if I double tap to zero this out, here's what's catching my eye. I feel like the blue in the sky is just a little too unrealistic. If I take that dehaze slider though, and I drag it to the left, watch what happens. Now that blue sky starts to get completely desaturated and it starts to take on the warmth of that sun. And honestly, I don't necessarily like this either though, because I like that color contrast. And I love how that transitions into a slightly cooler and darker blue area to the right-hand side of the frame. If I drag that dehaze slider just a little bit to the left, so we're removing details a little bit from areas where we don't want people to look. And at the same time, we're almost merging the color temperature, adding a little bit of warmth to the area of the sky that I thought honestly just looked a little bit too blue and unnatural. So now the only thing that's left to do is to click this checkbox here and show you the beautiful before and after. There's our before and there's our after. Now that is a dramatic improvement. If you apply radial gradients, if you figure out where you want people to look, and anytime you can light part of the image and it's warm versus cool and it's bright versus dark, we're getting contrast, we're getting something more dynamic than what we started with, and we're getting something that's honestly quite beautiful in the process. This video was a free preview of the iPhone Editing Academy online course. In this course, you'll discover everything you need to know to edit your photos to perfection using the device that's always in your pocket. Whether you want to breathe new life into your old images or make your best photos even better, you'll find out exactly how to do that on your iPhone. I'll show you the latest photo editing tricks that will transform even average photos into stunning masterpieces in just a few minutes. So if you'd like to learn more about creating incredible photo edits on your iPhone, please take a look at the full version of my iPhone Editing Academy course. You'll find the link in the description right next to this video. So click on that link now and I'll see you inside the full version of this course.